The sirens were still wailing when I got there, and my teenage son was already in cuffs, surrounded by 3 puffed-up men in matching HOA patrol windbreakers and clip-on badges. One of them, Frank, was lecturing him about resisting a community enforcement directive for skateboarding in a public park. My son was bloodied. My wife was screaming. And that's when Frank looked up at me and said, "Your boy's lucky we don't press charges." I smiled. "Actually," I replied, pulling out my wallet, "your boy's lucky you don't know who my son really is." When I left the force after 23 years of chasing meth heads through cornfields and writing up DUI arrests in the middle of hay festivals, I told myself I was done with drama. No more late-night calls. No more DI'd paperwork. No more code reds on back roads where backup's 30 minutes and 2 cows away. I figured I'd earned a little peace. So, we moved to Blue Jay Ridge, a tucked-away, meticulously maintained HOA community with white fences, hydrangeas, and enough posted speed limit signs to make a NASCAR driver weep. It was supposed to be quiet, safe retirement. I'd take up woodworking, maybe run for city council one day. My boy Jesse, he wasn't too thrilled about leaving his friends behind, but at 17, he had bigger dreams than small-town politics. Mostly those dreams involved a beat-up skateboard, a tripod, and a YouTube channel with 28 subscribers and a name I still can't say out loud without sounding like a dad. Grindfather 69. Jesse's not the talkative type. He's lanky, quiet, and quick with the kind of sarcasm that gets under people's skin if they don't know it's just his way of saying hello. He didn't drink, didn't party, didn't break things. He just skated. That board of his went wherever he did, even to church. He filmed tricks on curbs, stairs, benches, anything with an edge. And in Blue Jay Ridge, everything has an edge. The place is basically one big concrete skate park with tulips and HOA fines. At first, I thought nothing of it. He'd go out, skate a few hours, come home covered in dust and bruises, and upload another blurry video with a 10-second outro where he'd shout, "Like and subscribe, losers." But it didn't take long for the HOA to notice. First, it was a friendly warning about the noise. Then came the laminated letter on our mailbox about unauthorized wheeled equipment on common ground. I thought it was a joke until I met the so-called Community Enforcement Unit. They rolled up one afternoon in a tricked-out golf cart with police sirens duct taped to the roof and Blue Jay Ridge patrol stinkled in Comic Sans on the side. 3 of them climbed out like they were about to breach a meth den. Matching polo shirts, tactical khakis, and clipboards they held like holy books. Leading the squad was Frank Donnelly, a man with a chest like a filing cabinet and the personality of an expired seatbelt. Former mall cop, current HOA vice president, and self-appointed sheriff of our sidewalk. Frank took one look at Jesse grinding the edge of the community fountain and nearly had a coronary. "You can't do that here, son," he barked, puffing out his gut like a balloon animal. "These grounds are private property under HOA jurisdiction." Jesse blinked at him, stepped off the board, and replied, "I thought public fountains were for wishing and hydration." "My bad. I'll give the kid credit. He didn't swear, didn't mouth off, just picked up his board and walked home." But that was the beginning. Over the next few weeks, the unit escalated. Frank and his goons, Bert, the retired insurance adjuster, and Lenny, the guy who still wore his high school leather jacket, started patrolling daily. They'd circle Jesse like vultures on a heat wave, scribbling in their fake citation pads. Noise complaints for ollieing in our driveway, a curfew violation for being out at 9:30 p.m. When the HOA rule said 9:0 sharp, reckless scootering was my personal favorite, considering Jesse didn't even own a scooter. They even tried to write me up once for complicity by inaction. I told them the only thing I was complicit in was drinking my coffee too strong. Frank didn't laugh. Jesse tried to keep it cool. He started skating earlier, filming in the dead hours of morning, posting clips with titles like HOA versus blank. Me, spoiler, I lose. But the more he avoided them, the more they came looking. Frank would tail him with that golf cart like it was a patrol cruiser trying to bait him into reacting. One day, I came home to find Jesse sitting on the porch, bloody lip, busted board. They said I scratched the sidewalk. He muttered, eyes hard. Tried to make me sign a confession. I told them to eat mulch. I felt something twist in my gut. Then, something I hadn't felt since my early rookie years when I saw a rookie cop plant evidence and realized the badge could be just as dirty as the streets. I walked across the street to Frank's house and knocked. No answer. Just that damned golf cart parked on the lawn. Keys still in the ignition. Sirens deactivated. I didn't make a scene. Not yet. I knew how these things worked. Petty tyrants always escalate. They don't know how to stop, especially when they think no one's watching. The next week, Jesse got a letter from the HOA titled Final Violation Warning Skateboard-Related Incidents. I read it twice. They were threatening suspension of his community privileges, banning him from the clubhouse, the pool, even the basketball court. It was a war now, and my son was the enemy. But what Frank didn't know, what none of those clowns with badges from Amazon knew, was that Jesse wasn't just some punk kid on a board. He was my son, and I wasn't just a retired sheriff. I was still very much on the payroll. Kept my badge in a drawer with a gun I swore I'd never need again. And if Frank and his goon squad thought they were dealing with just another dad in cargo shorts, well, they were about to find out what happens when a suburban HOA tries to play cop in the wrong backyard. It was a Sunday, hot, humid, and quiet in that fake oppressive way only HOA neighborhoods can be. You could smell the chlorine from the community pool 3 blocks away, and the HOA newsletter had just dropped off another 4-color reminder that the Neighborhood Aesthetic Subcommittee would be inspecting fence heights this week. I was home cleaning the gutters, soaking my shirt in sweat and sarcasm when my phone rang. It was my wife, and she only got 4 words in before I dropped the ladder and sprinted to the truck. They took Jesse golf cart. That's all I needed. My tires squealed as I tore down our pristine cul-de-sac past trimmed hedges and HOA-mandated Bionas. By the time I hit the roundabout near the fountain, where the road split between the clubhouse and the tennis courts, I could already see the blinking red and blue lights, but not from an actual squad car. No, these were zip-tied bike lights stuck to the roof of Frank Donnie's tricked-out HOA golf cart. And my son was slumped in the back seat, wrists zip-tied behind him, blood running from his chin. He looked stunned but conscious, alive. His skateboard snapped clean in half, lay on the sidewalk. Frank and his buddies were chest out, clipboard waving, radio chattering like they just brought down El Chapo. He was trespassing, Frank was saying. Caught him grinding the curb by the fountain. Repeated vandalism. We made a legal citizen's arrest per neighborhood security protocols. That last part was delivered with the faux authority of someone who watches too much daytime courtroom TV and thinks Miranda rights apply to Home Depot parking lots. I parked hard, slammed the door, and stormed toward them. My boots hit the concrete like gunshots. "You put your hands on my kid," I said, voice low, steady. The kind of tone that made grown men confess to felonies and hand over their weed without being asked. "We detained him," Frank said, adjusting his badge, an enamel pin that said security advisor with an eagle that looked like it had been drawn by a cartoonist with vertigo. He resisted. "We had no choice. You detained a 17-year-old on public land with zip ties." My eyes were locked on Frank's, but I could see the clubhouse doors open behind him. 2 of the other board members, Lenny and Bert, were standing guard like wannabe prison wardens. They converted the HOA rec room into a holding cell complete with a folding chair, a bottle of water, and a plastic "do not enter" sign duct taped to the wall. "Where's the real law enforcement?" I asked. Frank puffed up. "I called the sheriff's department. We're awaiting backup. In the meantime, this falls under the community charter." "Bull," I spat. "The charter doesn't give you the right to detain, interrogate, or restrain, especially not a minor." My wife rushed over, reedy and furious, trying to get to Jesse, but Lenny stepped between them. "Ma'am, please stay back. We're in the middle of a security response." She nearly hit him. "That's my son, you jackasses." He fell. He hit his chin. "He's bleeding." Jesse raised his head slowly, and I could see now the scrape on his jaw, the way his shirt was torn across the back, the bruising on his wrist from where they'd zip-tied too tight. He looked at me, eyes calm, but glassy. "They tackled me," he said. "I wasn't even skating. I was filming, and I believed him." The GoPro strap was still around his chest. The lens cracked, but blinking red. I knew what would be on that footage. Frank snorted. "Skating, filming, doesn't matter. It's all criminal trespass. That fountain's restricted HOA property. No tricks, no loitering, no filming without authorization. We've posted it on every bulletin board in the subdivision." I stepped in close nose with Frank. "You're not a cop," I said slowly. "You're a guy with a clipboard and a midlife crisis." Lenny bristled at that. Bert muttered something about respecting authority. And that's when I saw the real problem. This wasn't just petty harassment anymore. These guys believed their own hype. They thought they were lawmen, neighborhood marshals, and they just roughed up a kid and locked him in a glorified pool room to prove a point. Cut him loose, I said. Now. Frank raised a hand like he was directing traffic. Sir, please step back. We have this under control. That's when the sheriff's department finally rolled in. 2 actual deputies, real uniforms, real cruisers, real badges. They stepped out slow, looking around the scene, eyes going from Jesse to the clubhouse to Frank's ridiculous setup. One of them, Deputy Cruz, a guy I trained with before retirement, spotted me and stopped mid-step. Sheriff Mallister, not on duty, I said, nodding. Just a dad today. He looked from me to Jesse. What happened? Frank stepped in like he'd been rehearsing this all week. We made a lawful citizen's arrest of a known violator. He's been cited multiple times for property damage and loitering. This time we found him filming an illegal skate session on private HOA grounds. He resisted. We detained. Cruz raised an eyebrow. You detained a minor in what? A clubhouse. We converted it into a temporary holding facility. Bert added proudly. It's been approved by the board. Cruz looked at me again, then at Jesse. Who authorized zip ties? Standard procedure? Frank said, non-lethal restraint. You have training for that? Cruz asked, his tone sharpening. Medical clearance, parental consent, any kind of incident documentation? Frank stammered. We have forms. Cruz turned to me. Sheriff, you want to file an incident report? I nodded slowly, heart pounding. You bet your ass I do. Start with false imprisonment, assault of a minor, impersonating law enforcement. Take your pick. Frank went pale. Lenny took a step back. Bert's clipboard drooped like a defeated flag. You don't get to play cop, I said, my voice booming now. You don't get to put your hands on kids and call it policy. This isn't a security issue. It's a lawsuit waiting to happen. Cruz nodded, turning to his partner. Secure the clubhouse. Separate all witnesses. We're going to need statements, footage, medical records, and that zip tie evidence. Jesse, still cuffed, looked up at me. You should see the footage, he whispered. It got everything. I walked over, pulled my pocket knife, and cut the ties myself. We'll make sure everyone sees it. Son, I said. Every single frame. As the officers started taking statements and cuffing the cuffs, Frank sputtering, Lenny protesting, Bert pretending not to exist, I walked over to my wife and pulled her close. He's going to be okay, I said. And they're not. Because what those HOA cops didn't know was that they hadn't just crossed the line, they detonated it. And the fallout was coming faster than they could golf cart their way out of. They say every man retires twice. The first time when he hangs up his badge, and the second when the job comes calling anyway. I never really got to enjoy the first. I turned in my paperwork with a handshake and a promise to take it easy, but the dirt didn't even settle on my boots before something started to itch. Blue Jay Ridge looked like a postcard. Sure, painted fences, matched mailboxes, and couples who jogged in coordinated outfits. But underneath the sod, something stank. I could feel it in my bones before we even finished unpacking. You spend 2 decades as a county sheriff. You learn to trust your gut. And mine was growling the minute I met Frank Donnelly. That handshake was too tight. His smile too eager. He called me boss in a way that wasn't respect. It was warning. At first, I thought it was just nonsense. They'd find a neighbor for putting up Halloween decorations on September 30th, or send a strongly worded email about a garden gnome disrupting visual uniformity. I'd seen that kind of petty power play before. Neighborhood fascists using bylaws like billy clubs. But then I started hearing things. A retiree down the street fined $300 for discolored shutters that hadn't changed in 20 years. A single mom told she'd violated vehicle uniformity because her car had a bumper sticker. An elderly veteran forced to remove a flagpole. It wasn't just micromanagement, it was targeting. And then came the budget meeting. I wasn't even on the board, but I attended as a resident. They were requesting a 15% increase in dues for community safety enhancements. When I asked to see the line item breakdown, Frank bristled. Karen, his secretary and second in command, said the numbers weren't available to non-board members. Transparency slows progress, she told me. I smiled, nodded, and went home that night to dig through the public records. What I found cracked the seal on something ugly. The HOA had voted in a special measure the year prior to increase enforcement visibility, and they'd earmarked nearly $470 for a rapid response vehicle. which turned out to be a souped-up golf cart with custom sirens, external speakers, and a set of off-road tires no golf course would dare host. Then there was the security budget. $21,000 to outfit 3 community enforcement officers with uniforms, radios, training sessions, and what they called non-lethal compliance tools. I made a note. Unlicensed security, no badges, no authority, just cosplay mall cops with a vengeance complex. I started documenting everything. Took photos, pulled tax filings, cross-referenced HOA resolutions with actual state codes, set up trail cams of the patrol routes. I had hours of footage showing Frank and his boys tailing residents in the dark, walking onto porches, taking pictures through windows, and in one case disabling someone's Ring camera during what they later claimed was a noise ordinance check. I hadn't planned to blow it open. Not yet. I was gathering, waiting, letting them dig the hole deeper. I needed something real, something that would snap the DA's attention and justify a full-blown internal probe. And then they touched Jesse. They crossed that line with jackboots and zip ties. And that's when the case stopped being theoretical. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table while Jesse nursed his split lip and showed me the GoPro footage. It was worse than I thought. Frank tackled him mid-trick, slammed him face first onto the pavement, and zip-tied his hands behind his back while Lenny held his legs. Jesse didn't resist. He just kept asking, "What did I do?" They never answered. Just read him charges off a laminated card with the HOA logo on the top and a bunch of fake penal codes they must have made up in Microsoft Word. Violation of subsection 5.31c, unauthorized performance on community property. Frank barked like it meant something. Jesse's camera caught everything. Their faces, their words, the way Bert kept glancing around like he knew it wasn't legal, but didn't want to be the one to say it. I uploaded the footage to 3 flash drives, printed stills, backed it all up on a hard drive that stays locked in my gun safe. By 6 a.m., I was in uniform, badge on my chest, real cruiser idling in the driveway. "You're supposed to be retired," my wife said, watching me load the evidence box into the trunk. I said, but they pulled me back in. First stop was the station. I met with Deputy Cruz, who'd been on scene the day before, and walked him through the footage. His face went still. They really zip-tied him in a rec room. "And that's just the surface," I told him. "We're looking at impersonation of law enforcement, false imprisonment, assault on a minor, and possibly RICO-level misuse of funds. You want to go to internal?" he asked. I nodded. Today, internal affairs was waiting for us by 10 a.m. They'd been itching to sink their teeth into something after a dry 6 months, and this was a Filt minion served medium rare with HOA seasoning. We put in the request for an emergency audit, issued an immediate cease and desist for all community enforcement activity under HOA sanction. That meant Frank's golf cart got impounded, their uniforms got bagged for evidence, and every clipboard became a subpoena in the making. By noon, 3 unmarked sedans rolled through Blue Jay like a storm front. One pulled up to Frank's house, another went to the HOA office at the clubhouse. The third parked outside Karen's where they were greeted by a dog that barked itself hoarse, while agents knocked on the door and handed her a folder thick enough to knock out a mule. I stayed back at the station watching the updates roll in like a general coordinating a raid. It was surgical. Frank came out of his house yelling, "I know my rights," which is what guys say right before they learn they don't. Karen tried to claim the records were digitally misfiled, which earned her a polite laugh and a flash drive request. Lenny, he folded faster than a napkin at a country buffet, gave up their whole fake training course in under 20 minutes. By 4:00 p.m., the sheriff's department issued a public statement suspending all community enforcement operations pending criminal investigation. Channel 8 News was outside the gates by sundown. HOA board members avoided the cameras like roaches from a floodlight. Residents peeked through blinds, unsure whether to cheer or cry. Me? I sat on the porch with Jesse, handed him a fresh deck for his board, and watched as the last remaining scrap of Frank's authority, his stupid HOA-issued badge, was bagged up by a real cop and tossed into an evidence bin. I took a deep breath. The war wasn't over. Not yet. But the tide had turned. And it was time the whole neighborhood learned who really wore the badge around here. The courtroom was packed like a church on Scandal Sunday. The air was stiff with perfume, cologne, and fear. Half the audience were Blue Junior residents, some still clutching their little HOA rule books like Holy Scripture. others wide-eyed and whispering, unsure which side of history they were about to land on. The rest were press reporters and one local kid in a Thrasher hoodie who somehow snuck in and had already been asked twice not to film on his phone. I sat in the front row next to Jesse, who looked out of place in his thrift store button-down and clean jeans. He fidgeted with a USB drive in his hand, the same one containing the now infamous footage. Frank Donnelly tackling him to the ground, zip-tying his wrists, and reading off fake charges like he was auditioning for a B-movie cop role. Across the aisle sat Frank, wearing a suit that looked like it hadn't seen daylight since the Bush administration. His face was puffy and pale. Karen wasn't seated next to him. She'd lawyered up separately. Smart. The rest of the former HOA board were scattered like fallen leaves, avoiding eye contact with everyone, especially themselves. All rise, the bailiff called, and just like that, the reckoning began. The prosecution wasted no time. They started with the GoPro footage, grainy, but clear enough to see the expression on Jesse's face when Frank slammed him down. The way Lenny muttered, "We should wait." And Frank hissed back, "Do it now. We've got him." The audio caught everything. The fake penal codes, the threats, the call to the clubhouse to prep the holding room. The jury squirmed. The judge took notes furiously. The room had gone so silent you could hear the AC kicking on every 20 minutes like a heartbeat trying to calm the storm. Then Jesse took the stand. He wasn't theatrical. He wasn't angry. He was just honest. He told them he was filming a trick for his YouTube channel. Showed the court the trick, a simple manual down the curb. Told them he'd done it 100 times without incident. He described how the golf cart sped toward him, how Frank shouted, "Trespassing," before even stepping out, how they tackled him, zip-tied his wrists until the plastic cut skin, and marched him like a captured fugitive into the HOA clubhouse. "I didn't know what was happening," Jesse said, voice steady. "I thought they were real cops at first. But then Frank called me a little punk who's going to learn today, and said he'd handled kids like me before. That's when I realized I wasn't being arrested. I was being punished." The room held its breath. I'd never been prouder. Not even when he hit that tray flip on our driveway last summer. Not even when he let me teach him how to parallel park without snapping the transmission. This was courage. Not the loud kind, the still kind. Frank's lawyer tried to paint it as a misunderstanding. Said Jesse had been warned multiple times. Said the board had implemented a community safety protocol that allowed for reasonable detainment. Said the video was edited and out of context, but the footage spoke louder than any lawyer could. Especially the part where Frank put on a knockoff tactical vest with HOA Security Division ironed on the back and posed for a selfie over Jesse's zip-tied form. That one made the jury gasp. And the part where Bert whispered, "You sure this is legal?" And Frank replied, "He's just a kid. Who's going to believe him?" sealed the coffin. When the verdict came, it wasn't just about Jesse. It was about all of it. The board's misuse of funds, the fake enforcement vehicles, the intimidation tactics, the surveillance footage they'd collected illegally from residents. The slush fund discovered in a side account labeled beautification projects that had paid for Karen's niece's college tuition. The HOA was dissolved by order of the county judge. Its remaining funds seized. Frank was sentenced to a year in county jail for false imprisonment, assault, impersonating an officer, and contributing to the delinquency of a minor through unlawful detainment. Karen fled the courtroom mid-verdict. Rumor is she moved to a town with no HOA. Fitting. But that wasn't the end. That night, the community center was vandalized. Not with destruction, but with defiance. Spray painted across the entire brick wall in huge dripping letters. Someone wrote, "Skate or die," underneath a stencil of Jesse's face wearing sunglasses and a backwards hat. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, especially not when the cul-de-sac kids started tagging their bikes and scooters with the same symbol. Jesse went from local delinquent to folk hero overnight. His YouTube channel went viral. The video of his arrest racked up over 10 million views. He even got a sponsor deal from a small skate company out of Portland. They shipped him a custom board that said, "This board is O-proof." He rides it every day. The fountain where this all began was renamed 2 months later. The Blue Jay Ridge Board approved it with unanimous vote after the Reformation Committee took over. They called it Jesse Mallister Memorial Plaza. Memorial, not because he died, but because something else did. The illusion of control. The idea that a group of suburban tyrants could create a kingdom out of clipboards and fines and not expect pushback. That was dead, buried. And Jesse, he skates that fountain now like it's his own front porch. Some mornings I sit on the real one, sipping my coffee, watching him glide across the concrete like he owns the sun. He doesn't say much, doesn't need to. I watch the neighbors nod to him now, the same ones who used to complain about the noise. Some bring their kids to watch. A few even ask if he teaches lessons. He doesn't, but he tells them to check his channel. Like and subscribe, losers. He still says at the end of every video. And just when I thought it was all over, all calm, I heard the buzz overhead, looked up from my coffee, squinting against the morning glare. A drone hovered 20 feet above the street, scanning the fountain. On its undercarriage was a fading logo, barely visible through the black spray paint. Someone had sloppily tried to cover it with, "Oh, Enforcement Division." I smiled, tipped my mug to it, and whispered to no one, "Here we go again." Always protect your rights and safety, especially when dealing with unofficial or overreaching authorities. Don't let anyone misuse rules or regulations to bully or harm you. Know the rights and limits of community organizations like HOAs, homeowners associations. These groups do not have law enforcement powers, and overstepping their bounds should be challenged and resisted. Document, save, and collect evidence if you or your family face unfair treatment or rights violations. Videos, photos, recordings, or any related documents can help protect you legally. If you encounter impersonation of law enforcement or abuse of power, contact official law enforcement agencies immediately for help and protection. Stay calm, patient, and fight for justice through legal and rational means rather than violence or anger. A smart strategy will help you achieve fairness without unnecessary harm. Don't hesitate to seek help from your community, lawyers, or rights organizations if you feel oppressed or threatened.